Okay, welcome to the next episode of Great War Story. Although strictly speaking, this is a post-Great War story. And I've called it I Swore I Would Never Parade Again. And this is a direct quote from my grandfather, and there he is. But it's also a bit of an insight into what he thought of his time in the army in World War One, and a bit of an indication of his very dry sense of humour. And there he is, one of the few photos I have of him with a bit of a smirk on his face, which, as you will see, is probably appropriate given what I'm about to tell you about. Now, before I get into that part, I want to say that this photo here, it's a very poor photo, is the last time he probably ever wore his army uniform. This was in 1919, after he had been discharged from the army, and he had been granted a relatively small and not very good farm in the South Island of New Zealand, and he set out with his new wife on a wagon to head towards it. And I think at the time the only decent clothing he had to wear was in fact his army uniform. So that's probably the last time that he ever dressed up in his military uniform. And to give you an idea of where they were going, they would have set out in that wagon from Dunedin, and they were heading to Middlemarch. Now, according to Google Maps now, it would take 16 and a half hours to walk there on foot, so presumably it took something fairly similar to travel to his new farm in his wagon. And Middlemarch, while this photo makes it look quite pretty, by all accounts it was quite bleak. Well, you can see the soil is not exactly all that great, and I'm told that it has quite a biting wind and the dust can really pick up. And ultimately, they were forced to walk off their farm, and I'll probably make an episode about that another time. But let's carry on to the year 1964. Now, to put this in context, my grandfather was born in December of 1893, so that means he was 70 years old when he received the following letter from the New Zealand Army. Notification of compulsory parades for national servicemen. The company looks to the volunteers, particularly the NCOs, to make these parades a success. It may also be remembered that these parades are a must to make your training year efficient, to count towards your gratuity. Please complete the pro forma below and return it in the stamped addressed envelope provided. Now, in the letter itself, gratuity and stamped addressed envelope provided are not underlined. I underline them for you because my grandfather is going to refer to those particular aspects in his reply. Now I ask you, when you look at the face of my grandfather, is this a person who's going to put up with any kind of nonsense from stupid military bureaucrats or any other kind of bureaucrat for that matter? I suspect I inherited his hatred for stupid bureaucrats and his complete impatience for them, and this is how he responded. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think that shows him as he was when he was about 70 years old, and there he is with his new wife, Anwell. And I'm told that he was much more serious before he married Anwell, and afterwards he became a lot lighter and a lot, well, jokier and relaxed and smiling. So perhaps also the humorous aspect of his reply was coming out at this time as well. And here's what he wrote. Anzac Day, 1964. Sir, in reply to your notice, unsigned, you didn't bother signing your letter to me, thank you for nothing. In reply to your notice, unsigned, to parade 23rd and 24th of May inclusive, I will be pleased to try to comply, if you will forward to me the appropriate uniform to fit height 5 foot 6 inches, waist 34 inches, complete with full 1914-1919 medal ribbons. 2 gold wound stripes on left arm. Now you can see here what he's talking about with the wound stripes. This photo from 1917 was taken after he had suffered a serious wound to his shoulder, but obviously not yet suffered that catastrophic wound to his face. So you can see what one wound stripe would look like. It's also rather nice because, of course, in a black and white photo, you can't tell what color they would have been. So we get a nice indication here that that line on his uniform would have been gold. So please provide me with a uniform and remember to include 2 gold wound stripes on left arm, 1 red and 5 blue inverted stripes for years of service on right lower arm. Now here's a photo of not my grandfather but a different soldier, and you can see he has 4 inverted stripes. Presumably that means he hadn't served quite as many years of service as my grandfather, but you can see what my grandfather is talking about there with the inverted stripes. And actually, when my grandfather finished World War I, he was a corporal, so he too would have had corporal stripes, like this particular fellow. Also, Lieutenant Stars and Sam Brown, etc. The Sam Brown belt is, well, the one you see in the photo. All of the above being required because my uniform was eaten by moths years ago. Sorry about the absence of stamp on envelope, but as no stamped envelope was enclosed as stated in paragraph 3, and as I have not received any army pay since 1919, no doubt the military authorities are better able to afford same. So they did say in their letter that you should reply using the enclosed stamped addressed envelope, and my grandfather's just merely pointing out, you said you were going to send one and you didn't. And on the left, I actually had looked to find some 1964 New Zealand stamps. New Zealand's often had some very nice stamps. And maybe one day I may even make an episode about something completely unconnected to World War I. The story about how I sort of accidentally ended up punching one of those penguins. And I will stress again that I didn't know it was a penguin at the time, but I don't know. If anybody's interested in that story, let me know and maybe I'll make an episode about it. And the one below, the first Christian service in New Zealand, 1814, and New Zealand Christmas stamps. As I said, New Zealand has often had a lot of really nice stamps. Let's carry on with my grandfather's letter. Having served from main body until close of the above-mentioned war, I was heartily sick of parading to the pleasure of various brass hats, and swore I would never parade again. Now, in New Zealand terminology, the main body was that first big contingent that went out with that first fleet. I've made a number of episodes about that voyage. They left in October of 1914. And these are various photos of, well, New Zealand troops parading for brass hats and on different occasions. If you're not familiar with the terminology, a brass hat is military slang for senior officer. I guess because they had so much brass on their generals' hats. However, having become a staid Presbyterian elder, I swear no more, and I appreciate your compliment that I will still be fit to do so, and will certainly appreciate the gratuity, which I note is printed and deserves capital letters. Remember I said, I underlined it in an earlier one, they said, we're going to pay you a gratuity and put it in all caps. And my grandfather is again just sarcastically pointing out how stupid that was. And the photo on the left does show my grandfather as a Presbyterian elder. In fact, it was when he was head of the Sunday school session clerk, and he was telling people not to make noise because there was a church service going on inside. And I think that comment about, sorry, I forgot it was Shakespeare week, is because when he typed out the letter, he spelled swore, S-W-O-R-E, incorrectly, but rather than retype the whole letter, he just used a pen, put a little asterisk, and made an excuse about it being Shakespeare week. And this is how he signed it. R.B. Fowler, Regimental Number 5/77, Corporal, Acting Sergeant, recently promoted, thank you. Because, of course, he was never an officer. His most senior permanent rank was corporal, For a while in England, he was elevated to be a temporary acting sergeant. That was the highest rank he ever received. But the letter that he received from the army was addressed to Lieutenant Fowler. So again, more sarcasm even in the signature. Corporal acting sergeant, recently promoted. Thank you. And there is my grandfather looking rather sour, and I can just imagine him with that expression on his face as he mailed that letter back to the army and saying, "And that is what I have to say to you." And he never did get a reply, but also he was never summoned again to go for his military service. So I guess they got the message, even if they didn't give him a reply. And that's all I have for you from this rather short episode today.